There are lies that are told in panic, and there are lies that are told calmly, carefully, almost convincingly. This story begins with one of the calmest lies imaginable. A lie that sounded ordinary. A lie that fit neatly into everyday life. A lie that would later collapse under the weight of its own simplicity. She left early for work on New Year's Day. That was the story. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just a routine explanation offered without hesitation. But behind that sentence sat a silence that grew louder by the hour. Because once those words were spoken, something terrifying became clear. No one ever saw her again. Before the world knew her name, Ana Walshe was simply a woman living what appeared to be a full and promising life. She was successful, ambitious, and deeply involved in her career. She was also a mother to 3 young children and a wife living in a quiet suburban home. From the outside, there was nothing about her life that suggested it would end up at the center of one of the most disturbing true crime cases in recent memory. Ana was the kind of person people described as driven. She worked hard, planned ahead, and carried herself with confidence. Her days were structured. Her responsibilities were many. Motherhood, career, marriage, all carefully balanced in a life that appeared stable and secure. She was present. She was visible. She was accounted for, until she wasn't. New Year's Day is supposed to symbolize beginnings, fresh starts, quiet reflection after celebration. But for Ana, it marked the last confirmed moment anyone could say they knew where she was. According to the story given, she had woken early, prepared to travel for work, and left the house while the rest of the world was still shaking off the night before. It sounded reasonable, almost forgettable, and that is what made it dangerous. Because lies that sound reasonable are the hardest to question. As the hours passed, Ana failed to appear where she was expected. Messages went unanswered. Calls went to silence. The woman who was always reachable simply vanished from the world without a trace. No phone activity, no financial movement, no sightings, no proof that she had ever stepped into the day she was supposedly traveling for. Yet the lie remained steady. She left early for work. If this is your first time on Real Crime Saga, this is where I ask you to pause for just a moment. If you're drawn to stories that expose the truth hidden beneath ordinary lives, stories where the smallest details unravel the biggest lies, then subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because this case is not about what happened in a dark alley or a moment of sudden violence. It is about what happens behind closed doors inside a home and inside a story that almost worked. As investigators would soon learn, this was not a disappearance shaped by chance or misfortune. It was shaped by control, deception, and a carefully constructed narrative meant to delay the truth. The lie was simple, but the reality behind it was anything but. And as the search for Ana began, one question quietly took center stage. If she really left that morning, why did the world stop hearing from her the moment she was supposed to arrive? That question would pull apart a marriage, expose a crime without a body, and reveal just how dangerous a perfect lie can be. To understand why Ana's disappearance unsettled so many people, you first have to understand who she was before everything went wrong. Ana Walshe was not someone who drifted through life unnoticed. She was present, purposeful, and deeply rooted in the routines she had built for herself and her family. Her life followed a rhythm, one shaped by responsibility, ambition, and consistency. Ana was a professional woman with a demanding career. She worked in a corporate environment that required structure, punctuality, and constant communication. Her role meant meetings, deadlines, and regular travel. She was not the kind of person who vanished without explanation. People depended on her. Her absence was not just unusual, it was alarming. When Ana failed to show up, it immediately broke the pattern everyone had come to expect. Beyond her career, Ana was a mother to 3 young children. Motherhood defined much of her daily life. School schedules, meals, bedtime routines, and the constant balancing act that comes with raising a family were all part of her world. She was involved. She was present. Her children were not an afterthought in her life. They were central to it. The idea that she would simply walk away from them without warning did not align with the person those closest to her knew. Her home life, at least on the surface, appeared stable. Ana lived with her husband, Brian Walshe, in a quiet residential neighborhood. Their home was not marked by chaos or constant conflict visible to outsiders. Like many families, they appear to be navigating the pressures of work, parenting, and everyday life. Nothing about their situation stood out as alarming. There were no public signs of crisis, no dramatic events that suggested something was about to break. Brian, her husband, fit neatly into this picture of normalcy. He was part of the routine, a spouse, a father, a familiar presence in the home. At this stage of the story, there was nothing outwardly suspicious about him. He existed in Ana's life as a constant, someone who shared her space, her responsibilities, and her daily environment. Their marriage, to those looking in, appeared functional, if not particularly remarkable. And that ordinariness is important, because crimes that shock the public often do not come from obviously broken lives. They come from lives that look like everyone else's. Ana's days followed predictable patterns. She communicated regularly. She planned ahead. She showed up where she was expected to be. Her life was built on routine, and routine leaves a trail. That is why her disappearance did not feel like an accident. It felt like an interruption. Something had forcibly removed her from a life that was still very much in motion. This sense of normalcy is what made her absence so disturbing. There was no gradual unraveling, no slow withdrawal. One day, she was present in every sense of the word. The next, she was gone. No warning, no explanation, no deviation from character that could soften the shock. As investigators would soon realize, the stability of Ana's life would become one of the strongest indicators that something was wrong. People who live predictable lives leave predictable traces. When those traces suddenly stop, it is rarely without reason. And as attention turned inward, away from speculation and toward the home Ana never returned to, the picture of normal life began to crack. What looked stable on the outside would soon reveal tensions, secrets, and lies hidden beneath the surface. The normalcy that once protected the truth was about to expose it. Because when someone like Ana disappears, the question is not whether something happened. The question is who was close enough to make it happen without being noticed. New Year's Eve carried the familiar energy of transition. It was the final night of the year, a moment when people gathered to eat, drink, and mark the passing of time. Inside Ana Walshe's home, the evening unfolded in a way that felt ordinary, even relaxed. There was dinner, there was conversation, there was alcohol. Nothing about that night suggested it would become the final chapter of Ana's life. Ana spent the evening at home with her husband and a close friend. The atmosphere was social, but not chaotic. This was not a party spiraling out of control or a night marked by obvious conflict. It was the kind of gathering many families experience at the end of the year. Laughter, conversation, reflections on the year gone by, and casual plans for what lay ahead. To anyone observing from the outside, it would have looked like a peaceful way to welcome the new year. As the night progressed, alcohol was consumed. This detail would later become important, not because it immediately raised alarms, but because it added complexity to what followed. Alcohol blurs memory. It softens timelines. It creates gaps that can later be filled with assumptions rather than facts. That night, no one suspected those gaps would matter. When the celebrations wound down, the household began to settle. The early hours of New Year's Day arrived quietly. According to the timeline later presented, Ana was last seen sometime in the early morning hours. This was the final moment when anyone could confirm her presence with certainty. No photographs, no videos, no digital footprints beyond that point. Just the word of those who were there. It was during this window that the story of her departure was formed. The explanation was simple. Ana, it was said, had plans to travel for work. She needed to leave early, before dawn. While the rest of the household slept, she supposedly prepared herself, gathered her belongings, and stepped out into the new year alone. No drama, no farewell scene, just a quiet exit. But this is where the certainty ends. There is no independent confirmation of Ana leaving the house. No neighbor saw her go. No camera captured her departure. No transport record placed her on a journey. The early morning timeline exists only through what was later described, not through what could be verified. And that distinction matters. This moment, the early hours of New Year's Day, stands as the last confirmed point at which Ana was alive and present. Everything after that becomes a matter of reconstruction rather than observation. Investigators would later return to this narrow window again and again, knowing that whatever happened to Ana had to have happened here. The stillness of the house that morning is haunting in retrospect. A home where children slept. A city slowly waking up to a new year. And somewhere inside that quiet, a life was ending or had already ended. The contrast between the celebration of a new beginning and the reality of a sudden disappearance could not be more striking. What makes this moment especially disturbing is how easily it could have passed without question. A woman leaving early for work after New Year's Eve is not unusual. The explanation fit the setting. It fit the timing. It fit the expectations of the day. But the absence of proof would soon speak louder than the story itself. Because once the sun rose and the day unfolded, Ana did not arrive anywhere. She did not check in. She did not respond. The woman who was supposedly in motion simply stopped existing in the world beyond that house. And as investigators would later realize, New Year's Day was not the beginning of a journey. It was the end of one. By the morning of New Year's Day, the story of Ana's quiet departure was already beginning to unravel, even if no one realized it yet. The first sign that something was wrong came not from police, neighbors, or family, but from absence. Ana did not arrive where she was expected to be. For someone whose life revolved around schedules and communication, this absence was not normal. It was loud. Ana was supposed to show up for work. She was expected. People were waiting for her. Hours passed, and there was no sign of her. No explanation. No last-minute message saying she was delayed. No brief call to say plans had changed. In a professional world where silence is rare and accountability is constant, her failure to appear immediately raised concern. As the day moved on, attempts were made to reach her. Calls went unanswered. Messages were not delivered. There was no response of any kind. What made this more alarming was not just the lack of contact, but the complete shutdown of her digital presence. Ana's phone showed no activity. Her credit cards were untouched. There were no emails sent, no location pings, no signs that she had engaged with the world at all since the early hours of the morning. This was not someone taking a break. This was someone who had vanished. By the time concern escalated into action, the possibility of a simple misunderstanding had faded. Ana's friends and colleagues knew her patterns. They knew she did not disappear without notice. Eventually, the situation crossed the line from worry into fear, and a missing person report was filed. This was no longer an inconvenience or a scheduling issue. It was now a formal search for a woman who had seemingly stepped out of existence. When authorities began asking questions, attention naturally turned to the last person known to have been with her. Her husband was asked to explain what he knew, and he offered the same explanation that would soon echo throughout the investigation. Ana left early for work. According to him, she had plans. She needed to travel. She left before dawn while others slept. It was a simple narrative delivered calmly. On the surface, it made sense. People travel for work. People leave early. Nothing about the explanation immediately contradicted reality. But simplicity can be deceptive. As investigators attempted to verify his account, small issues began to emerge. There was no confirmation that Ana had boarded a flight. No evidence that she had checked in anywhere. No transport records supported the claim that she had traveled at all. Each missing confirmation added weight to the silence that surrounded her disappearance. The cracks did not appear all at once. They formed slowly through unanswered questions and missing details. Why had no one seen her leave? Why was there no trace of movement? Why did every attempt to place her outside the home fail? The story remained the same, but the lack of proof began to speak for itself. Investigators are trained to listen not just to what is said, but to what cannot be backed up. In Ana's case, The explanation relied entirely on trust without evidence. And as the search continued, that trust would erode. Because disappearances do not exist in isolation. They leave shadows. And the deeper investigators looked into Anna's last known movements, the more it became clear that this was not a case of someone who failed to show up. It was a case of someone who had been stopped from ever arriving. When investigators asked Ana Walshe to explain what had happened, his account was delivered with clarity and simplicity. There was no visible panic, no emotional breakdown, no confusion about the sequence of events. According to him, everything that happened that morning followed a straightforward plan. Ana left early. That was the foundation of his story. He explained that Ana had woken up before dawn, aware of her work commitments and the need to travel. She had packed what she needed, prepared quietly, and left the house while the rest of the family slept. There was no argument, no unusual behavior, just a woman starting her day earlier than most. She was heading to the airport. Brian stated that Ana was scheduled to travel for work. This was not framed as a last-minute decision or a sudden change of plans. It was presented as something expected, something routine. Business travel was part of Anna's life. Leaving early to catch a flight fit seamlessly into that narrative. The idea of her walking out into the cold, early hours of New Year's Day to make a flight did not initially seem far-fetched. She had work commitments. That detail was meant to close the loop. It explained the urgency. It explained the early departure. It explained why she would leave without saying goodbye to anyone who might still be asleep. In Brian's version, everything about Anna's disappearance was explained by responsibility, duty, routine, professional obligation. On its own, the story sounded reasonable. It was not dramatic. It did not raise immediate alarms. There were no obvious contradictions in the way it was told. And perhaps that was its greatest strength. It did not demand attention. It asked for acceptance. It relied on the assumption that normal lives produce normal explanations. But investigators are trained to sit with stories like this, to let them breathe, to allow the details to settle before testing their weight. So let's pause here. Imagine this version of events exactly as it was presented. A mother of 3 wakes early on New Year's Day. She quietly leaves her home to travel for work. She does not check her phone again. She does not message her colleagues. She does not arrive anywhere. She does not leave a trace behind. Not a call, not a message, not a digital footprint. This is the point where silence becomes significant, because the story does not explain what happened after she left. It assumes continuity. It assumes that the journey unfolded as planned. But assumptions are not evidence. And as the hours turned into days, the absence of any proof that Ana had ever reached the airport began to weigh heavily against the simplicity of Brian's account. The story remained unchanged, but the world around it did not support it. No airport staff remembered her. No security cameras captured her. No transport service logged her presence. The path she was supposed to take simply did not exist. This is where investigators begin to lean forward. Because when a story explains everything too neatly, yet nothing can be confirmed, it becomes less of an explanation and more of a shield, a barrier between the truth and the questions closing in around it. And as police continue their search, that calm, simple story would soon face a level of scrutiny it was never built to withstand. At first, the investigation moved cautiously, guided by the assumption that Ana had simply failed to check in or had encountered an unexpected delay. But as police began verifying the details of the husband's account, the calm surface of the story started to fracture. Not dramatically, not all at once. The shift happened quietly, through the absence of things that should have been easy to find. The first red flag came with flight records. If Ana had left early for the airport, there should have been evidence of that journey. A booked flight, a boarding pass, a check-in record, something, anything that placed her on a plane that morning. But when investigators checked, there was nothing. No record of Ana boarding a flight. No confirmation that she had even checked in for one. For a woman whose career relied on planning and logistics, this absence was difficult to ignore. Then came the airport footage. Modern airports are saturated with cameras. Entrances, terminals, security checkpoints, baggage areas, all constantly monitored. Investigators reviewed footage looking for Anna's face, her movements, her luggage. But again, there was nothing. She did not appear on any camera. There was no visual evidence that she had entered the airport at all. It was as if the journey she was supposed to have taken never began. The next step was transportation. If Ana had gone to the airport, she would have needed a way to get there. A taxi, a ride-share, a private car service. Investigators searched for records that might place her in transit. But no ride was logged. No driver reported picking her up. No data suggested she had used any service that morning. Every possible route out of the house led to the same conclusion. She had not gone anywhere. As these gaps widened, attention turned to Anna's digital life. Phones rarely lie. They record movement, communication, intent. But Anna's phone told a story of complete silence. There were no outgoing calls, no incoming messages answered, no activity of any kind. The device had gone dark. For someone who relied on her phone for both work and family, this silence was deeply abnormal. Then there were finances. Credit cards are often the most reliable witnesses in disappearance cases. They record presence through spending. But Anna's cards remained untouched. No purchases, no transactions, no sign that she had bought food, paid for transport, or checked into a hotel. The world had not felt her presence since the early hours of New Year's Day. Each missing piece alone might have been explained away. A delayed flight, a phone left behind, a forgotten wallet. But together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Every system that should have confirmed Anna's movement instead confirmed her absence. This is the moment where suspicion shifts. Not sharply, not with accusation, but with awareness. Investigators did not announce their doubts. They did not confront anyone publicly. But internally, the focus began to narrow. The assumption that Ana had left the house on her own began to feel less likely with every failed verification. The story that once sounded reasonable now felt fragile. Because for Ana to have left that morning, she would have had to move through a world that records almost everything without leaving a single trace. No camera, no signal, no payment, no witness. And that is not how real life works. This quiet accumulation of red flags marked the turning point of the investigation. The search was no longer about finding a missing woman who had wandered off course. It was about understanding why every trail stopped at the same place. The house she never left. Once the red flags could no longer be explained away, the tone of the investigation changed. What began as a search for a missing person slowly transformed into something far more focused. Police stopped asking general questions and started asking precise ones. They were no longer trying to understand where Ana might have gone. They were trying to understand what had happened before she was supposed to leave. The questions became sharper. Investigators returned to the timeline, pressing for exact times rather than rough estimates. When did Ana go to bed? When was she last spoken to? What was she wearing? What did she take with her? These details matter because truth holds steady under pressure, while lies tend to bend. And under this pressure, the husband's account began to shift. At first, the changes were subtle. Small adjustments, minor clarifications. A time moved slightly earlier. A detail added that hadn't been mentioned before. None of it dramatic enough to draw immediate accusation, but enough to raise concern. Investigators are trained to notice these shifts because memory usually fades in predictable ways. Stories, however, change in patterns that reflect intention. As questioning continued, inconsistencies began to stack up. One version of events conflicted with another. Certain details no longer aligned with earlier statements. What Ana had packed, when she had packed it, and how prepared she had been became unclear. These were not insignificant details. They were the building blocks of the story that placed Ana outside the home. Each inconsistency widened the gap between what was being said and what could be proven. Police also began to examine behavior. Not just what was said, but how it was said. The calm delivery, the lack of urgency, the absence of visible concern as days passed with no sign of Ana. People react differently to stress, but patterns still emerge. And the pattern unfolding here did not match that of someone desperately searching for a missing spouse. With no evidence supporting the idea that Ana had left the house, investigators had to consider the alternative. If she did not go to the airport, if she did not travel, if she did not move through the city that morning, then the most likely explanation was the simplest and the most uncomfortable. She never left. That realization marked a quiet but significant shift. The investigation turned inward, away from airports and highways, away from travel records and digital trails. The focus moved back to the place where Ana was last confirmed to be alive, the home. Police began looking closely at the environment Ana had shared with her husband, not just as a residence, but as a potential crime scene. They examined routines, movement within the house, opportunities for privacy, times when no one else was awake. The early hours of New Year's Day took on a new meaning. What once seemed like a normal domestic space now became the center of the investigation. This shift did not happen publicly. There were no dramatic announcements, no flashing lights or immediate arrests. Instead, the pressure increased quietly. Investigators watched, listened, and waited. They compared statements. They revisited earlier conversations. They tested the story against reality again and again. And each time, it failed to hold. Small inconsistencies that might have been dismissed early on now carried serious weight. In investigations like this, truth tends to repeat itself. Lies require maintenance. They need adjustment as new information emerges. The more a story changes, the harder it becomes to control. By this point, police were no longer trying to find Ana. They were trying to understand how a woman could disappear from her own home without leaving a trace, and why the person closest to her could not keep his story straight. The walls were closing in, not with noise or spectacle, but with patience. And the truth, buried somewhere inside that house, was beginning to surface. Up until this point, the case against Ana's husband was built on absence. Missing records, inconsistent timelines, a story that could not be verified. But absence, while troubling, is not always enough to transform suspicion into certainty. That changed when investigators turned to something far more revealing than words or behavior. They turned to the internet. In modern investigations, digital footprints often speak when people will not. Phones, computers, and search histories capture thoughts in their rawest form, questions asked in private moments before anyone knows to look. When investigators examined the online activity connected to Ana's husband, what they found altered the direction of the case completely. The searches were not vague. They were not abstract. They were specific, graphic, and deeply disturbing. Queries related to body disposal appeared in the search history. Questions about how long it takes for a body to decompose, how to dispose of a body without being detected, how to clean blood from surfaces, how to remove DNA. These were not searches driven by curiosity or academic interest. They were practical, methodical, written by someone seeking instruction. The timing of the searches made them even more damning. They were conducted shortly after Ana was last seen alive. This detail is critical. People search strange things all the time, but context gives meaning. These searches did not exist in isolation. They existed alongside a missing woman, a collapsing alibi, and a home that had become the last known location of her life. When viewed together, the searches no longer looked hypothetical. They looked preparatory. Investigators understand that internet searches can reflect intent. These were not emotional searches expressing fear or confusion. They were problem-solving searches. Searches focused on logistics, on concealment, on erasure. They suggested that someone was not asking what happened, but rather, how do I deal with what I've done? This discovery marked a turning point. Up until now, the investigation had been about verifying or disproving a story. With these searches, it became something else entirely. The case was no longer built on what could not be found, but on what had been actively sought. The digital trail suggested planning, awareness, and an attempt to control the outcome. It also explained the absence of evidence elsewhere. If someone had been researching how to clean a crime scene and remove traces, then the lack of blood, the lack of visible struggle, and the lack of physical evidence no longer seemed coincidental. They seemed intentional. The silence left behind was no longer mysterious. It was manufactured. From this moment on, the investigation shifted into a new phase. Ana was no longer just missing. Investigators began operating under the belief that she had been killed and that efforts had been made to make her disappearance look ordinary. The internet searches bridged the gap between suspicion and motive. They revealed a mind working behind the scenes while a calm story was presented to the world. This was the point where the case stopped being about finding Ana alive. It became about proving what had been done to her. For investigators, this discovery validated the unease they had felt from the beginning. The inconsistencies, the calm explanations, the lack of urgency, all of it now made sense in a way that was both clarifying and horrifying. The digital footprint did not just suggest guilt. It suggested awareness of guilt. And once that door was opened, there was no closing it. The case had crossed a line. There was no going back to explanations built on routine or misunderstanding. The investigation was now following a darker path, one that would lead through the home, the timeline, and ultimately to a crime without a body but not without a perpetrator. From here on, every question carried a different weight, because investigators were no longer asking if Ana was alive. They were asking how far someone had gone to make sure she was never found. When police turned their full attention to the home Ana had shared with her husband, they were no longer searching for signs of daily life. They were searching for disruption, for traces of something that did not belong. And what they uncovered told a story that words alone never could. There was no body, no obvious scene of violence, no dramatic pool of blood or overturned furniture. To an untrained eye, the home looked lived in, ordinary, almost untouched. But investigators know that crime scenes do not always announce themselves. Some are quiet, some are hidden beneath effort. As forensic teams examined the house more closely, subtle signs began to emerge. Marks that suggested aggressive cleaning, areas that appeared unusually scrubbed, trash that had been taken out with unusual urgency. These details mattered because normal cleaning follows patterns. This did not. It looked purposeful. Investigators also noted missing items, objects that should have been present but were not, cleaning supplies that had been heavily used, bags that had been discarded. Each missing or altered detail suggested not carelessness, but intention. Someone had not just cleaned, someone had tried to reset the space. Then there were traces that resisted removal. Even the most thorough attempts to erase a crime leave something behind. Tiny fragments, residue, evidence that survives effort. Forensic analysis revealed indications that violence had occurred within the home. Not chaos, but force. Enough to contradict the idea that Ana had simply walked out on her own. The absence of a body might have once seemed like a weakness in the case, but in reality, it became one of its most powerful elements. Because if Ana had truly left the house alive, there would have been no reason to erase anything. No reason to clean with urgency. No reason to remove items connected to her presence. A crime scene without a body forces investigators to rely on circumstantial evidence. And circumstantial evidence, when layered carefully, can be just as compelling as direct proof. It is not about a single piece of evidence pointing to guilt. It is about many pieces pointing in the same direction. In this case, those pieces included the last confirmed sighting, the digital searches, the failed alibi, the inconsistencies in the timeline, and now, the physical environment itself. Each element alone might have raised questions. Together, they formed a narrative that could not be ignored. Circumstantial evidence works by removing alternatives. The more explanations are tested and discarded, the clearer the remaining truth becomes. Ana did not leave the house. She did not travel. She did not communicate. And the space where she was last seen showed signs of concealment rather than continuity. This is how crimes without bodies are proven. Not through a single dramatic revelation, but through accumulation, through patience, through details that refuse to align with innocence. The home, once a symbol of stability and routine, had become a silent witness. It did not speak loudly, but it spoke clearly enough for those trained to listen. The effort to erase what happened inside it only confirmed that something terrible had occurred. By this stage, investigators were no longer building a theory. They were assembling a case. One that did not rely on finding Ana's body to understand her fate. One that recognized that violence leaves echoes, even when someone tries to silence them. And as the walls of the home gave up their secrets, attention turned toward accountability. Because someone had gone to great lengths to erase a moment. And people do not erase moments that never happened. The arrest did not come suddenly. It arrived at the end of a slow, tightening process, one that had been unfolding quietly behind scenes. By the time police moved in, the investigation had already crossed a threshold. The story that once sounded reasonable had collapsed under scrutiny, and the evidence, though circumstantial, had grown too heavy to ignore. Ana's husband was arrested. At first, the charge was not murder. It was something that often marks the beginning of accountability in cases like this. He was taken into custody for misleading investigators, lying to police, providing false information during an active investigation. On paper, it may have sounded procedural. In reality, it was a signal. Authorities were no longer treating him as a grieving spouse. They were treating him as a suspect. This initial arrest sent shockwaves through the case. It publicly confirmed what had previously existed only in quiet suspicion. The calm narrative of a woman leaving early for work was officially being challenged by law enforcement. And once that barrier was broken, everything moved faster. As investigators continued to build their case, the scope of the charges expanded. The digital searches, the inconsistencies, the forensic findings inside the home, the absence of any evidence that Ana had ever left alive. Each piece added pressure, tightening the legal framework around the suspect. Then came the escalation. Murder charges were filed. This was the moment the case shifted from a disturbing mystery to a full-scale criminal prosecution. Charging someone with murder without a recovered body is a serious step. It requires confidence. It requires a narrative strong enough to stand in court. It requires evidence that tells a clear story even in the absence of the victim herself. Prosecutors made it clear that they believed Ana had been killed inside her home and that her husband was responsible. The charge reflected not just suspicion, but the belief that the evidence supported a deliberate act followed by an attempt to conceal the crime. Public reaction was immediate and intense. The case exploded across media outlets. Headlines focused on the betrayal, the digital searches, the missing body. People struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet family home with the allegations now being laid out. The idea that someone could kill their spouse, erase the scene, and calmly present a false story struck a nerve. Social conversations ignited. True crime communities dissected every detail. Questions flooded in. How could this happen without anyone noticing? How could a body disappear? How strong could a case really be without physical remains? The absence of Ana's body became a point of fascination as much as horror. Media attention amplified everything. The timeline was replayed. The internet searches were analyzed. The home was scrutinized from every angle. Ana's life, once private and ordinary, was now laid bare for the public to examine. Her role as a mother, her career, her final night, all became part of a narrative she never chose to tell. Through it all, one fact remained unchanged. Ana was still missing. The arrest and charges did not bring closure. They brought clarity. They marked the moment when the justice system formally acknowledged what investigators had come to believe, that this was not a disappearance. It was a homicide, and that someone who had once shared Ana's life now stood accused of ending it. As the case moved toward trial, the focus shifted again, from investigation to proof, from suspicion to persuasion. The courtroom would become the next battlefield, and every detail uncovered so far would be tested under oath. Because charging someone with murder is only the beginning. Convincing a jury is something else entirely. By the time prosecutors stepped forward with their theory, the case had moved beyond the question of whether Ana Walshe had simply disappeared. The state's position was clear. Ana did not vanish on her own. She was killed, And the person they believe killed her was the man who lived with her, shared children with her, and had the closest access to her during the final hours she was seen alive. The prosecution's theory was built carefully, step by step, like assembling a picture from fragments. Because without a fully recovered body, they could not rely on a single dramatic piece of evidence to do the work for them. They had to show a story that made sense, a story supported by many independent details that all pointed in the same direction. First, motive. Prosecutors argued that this was not a random act of violence. It was personal, rooted in tension and conflict that may not have been visible to outsiders, but existed beneath the surface. In cases like this, motive is rarely about a single argument or a sudden outburst. It is often about pressure building over time, about resentment, control, money, lifestyle, or the fear of losing something. The prosecution's job was not necessarily to prove exactly what was in his heart, but to show that he had reasons strong enough to push him into something irreversible. The case, as presented, suggested that the relationship was not as stable as it appeared. The normal exterior of the home, the image of a routine family life, could exist alongside private dysfunction. Prosecutors positioned motive as the spark behind what happened, an underlying force that made the violence plausible. Next, opportunity. This was one of the strongest parts of the theory, because opportunity was undeniable. Ana was last confirmed alive inside her home, during the early hours of New Year's Day. That narrow window mattered. It was a time when the world was asleep, when neighbors were not watching, when ordinary routines were paused. And the person with the most access to Ana during that period was her husband. Opportunity is about proximity and timing. Prosecutors argued that Ana did not leave for the airport because there was no evidence she ever made it there. No flight records, no footage, no ride-share activity, no financial transactions. The absence of all these things suggested she never made it beyond the home. And if she never left the house, then whoever harmed her likely did so there, within that private space, during that early morning window. Then, method. This is where the case grew darker. Prosecutors believed Ana was killed inside the home, and that the crime was followed by a deliberate attempt to remove evidence. The digital searches, described as practical and disturbing, became central here. Searches about cleaning, disposal, and erasing traces were presented as indicators of intent and preparation. Prosecutors argued that these were not random searches. They were searches made by someone who had already done something and needed to control what came next. The forensic indicators inside the home supported this idea. Evidence of unusual cleaning, signs that someone had tried to reset the environment, and the broader pattern of deception all reinforced the prosecution's theory that the method was not only violence, but concealment. And here is the point: the prosecution could not escape and did not try to hide. Ana's body was not fully recovered. This absence was both the challenge and the centerpiece of the case. The prosecution's position was that the lack of a body was not proof of innocence, but evidence of effort. They argued that the concealment of Ana's remains was part of the crime itself, a continuation of the same act, extending beyond murder into dismemberment, disposal, and erasure. A body not found does not mean a person was not killed. It can mean someone worked hard to ensure the truth stayed buried. In this theory, every missing trace was not an accident. It was a choice. And as the case moved closer to trial, prosecutors prepared to convince a jury of something terrifying. That even without Ana's full remains, the story of her death could still be proven through what was left behind, what was searched, what was cleaned, and what could never be verified. Because the prosecution was not only asking a jury to believe Ana was dead, they were asking them to believe someone had taken deliberate steps to make sure she could not be found. When the trial finally began, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was heavy, controlled, and tense. This was not a case driven by dramatic eyewitnesses or shocking video footage played on loop. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. Every person in the room understood the weight of what was being argued. A woman was gone. A body had not been fully recovered. And yet, a man sat before the court accused of murdering his wife. The prosecution opened by laying out the scope of the case. They reminded the jury that not all murders leave behind visible scenes or clear timelines. Some are hidden behind routine, behind domestic walls, behind carefully constructed lies. This, they argued, was one of those cases. From the very beginning, the courtroom was asked to look beyond what was missing and focus on what remained. Key testimonies followed. Colleagues and friends described Ana as reliable, organized, and deeply connected to her responsibilities. These testimonies were not emotional outbursts, but steady reminders of who Ana was and how unlikely it was that she would abandon her life without warning. Investigators then took the stand, walking the jury through the painstaking process of eliminating every alternative explanation for her disappearance. Each failed verification was explained carefully, showing how the idea of Ana traveling that morning fell apart step by step. Digital evidence became one of the most powerful elements of the trial. The prosecution presented internet search records in a way that forced the jury to confront their meaning. These were not vague or accidental searches. They were specific, practical, conducted in close proximity to Ana's disappearance. The courtroom grew noticeably still as jurors listened to the phrasing of those searches and the timing surrounding them. It was difficult to hear them and imagine innocence. The emotional weight of the case settled heavily over the proceedings. Ana's absence was felt in every testimony. She was present only through descriptions, through timelines, through evidence. Her children were referenced often, not for sympathy, but to reinforce the reality of what was lost. A mother had vanished from their lives. A life had been interrupted permanently. The defense faced a difficult task. Their position focused on doubt. They argued that without a body, the case rested on interpretation rather than certainty. They challenged the strength of circumstantial evidence, suggesting alternative explanations for the digital searches and the inconsistencies in the timeline. They pointed out that suspicion does not equal proof and urged the jury to resist filling gaps with assumptions, no matter how unsettling the narrative might feel. But the prosecution's final argument brought everything together. They reminded the jury that the law does not require a body to prove murder. It requires evidence. And evidence, they argued, was everywhere. In the silence of Ana's phone, in the absence of travel records, in the digital searches that revealed intent, in the cleaning that suggested erasure, in the shifting story told by the one person who claimed to know exactly what happened. The prosecution framed the case as a story of control, a deliberate act followed by deliberate concealment. They argued that the lack of a body was not a weakness, but the result of effort. That Ana's disappearance was not mysterious, but manufactured. As closing statements ended, the courtroom fell into a deep, reflective silence. This was not a case asking for an emotional reaction. It was asking for judgment, a decision that would define how justice could be served even when a victim could no longer speak for herself. The fate of the accused now rested with the jury, and the truth, as carefully assembled as it was devastating, waited to be decided. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted in a way that words struggled to capture. This was no longer a space for arguments or theories. It was a space for conclusion. Days of testimony, evidence, and careful deliberation had led to this moment, and everyone present understood what was at stake. Not just the fate of the accused, but the question of whether justice could be delivered without the one thing many people still expected to see. The jury had reached a decision. As the verdict was read, the weight of the case settled fully into the room. The jurors had listened. They had examined the inconsistencies, the digital evidence, the forensic findings, and the absence that defined the case. And they had come to the same conclusion prosecutors had argued from the beginning. Guilty. The verdict confirmed what investigators had believed for months. That Ana Walshe did not disappear by choice. That her life was taken deliberately. And that the effort to erase her, to remove her from the physical world, did not remove the truth of what had been done. The conviction was followed by sentencing, and the tone of the courtroom grew even heavier. This was the final legal step, the point where the consequences of the verdict would be made permanent. The judge delivered the sentence with clarity and finality. life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no future hearings to reconsider release. No chance of freedom decades down the line. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime and the belief that it was carried out with intent and followed by calculated concealment. It was the harshest penalty available, and it was imposed without hesitation. Legally, the case was over. There would be no more arguments, no more evidence presented, no more courtroom debates. The justice system had reached its conclusion, but emotionally, the story did not end there. For Ana's family, the sentence did not bring back what was lost. It did not answer every question. Her body had not been fully recovered. There was no place to grieve in the traditional sense. No final goodbye. Closure, in its truest form, remained elusive. For the public, the verdict was both satisfying and unsettling. It affirmed that circumstantial evidence can speak loudly when pieced together carefully. But it also left people confronting an uncomfortable truth, that someone could be erased so thoroughly that justice must be built without the comfort of physical proof. The guilty verdict was a statement, not just about one man's actions, but about accountability, about the idea that lies, no matter how calm or well-constructed, eventually collapse. That digital footprints, silence, and absence can tell a story as clearly as witnesses. The legal process had ended, but the emotional weight of the case lingered. Ana's name would continue to be spoken. Her story would continue to be told, and her absence would remain a reminder that justice does not always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes, justice is not about finding what was lost. It is about proving that it mattered. After the verdict was read and the sentence handed down, the courtroom emptied, but the consequences of what happened did not leave with it. The aftermath of Ana's murder stretched far beyond legal documents and prison walls. It settled into lives that would never return to what they once were, especially the lives of the children left behind. 3 children woke up one day without their mother and would believe, for a time, that she had simply gone away. As the truth unfolded, their loss became something far heavier than absence. They lost not only a parent, but the version of their family they had known. Childhood memories once filled with routine and stability were now permanently shadowed by violence and betrayal. No sentence, no verdict, could shield them from the reality that their mother was gone and that the person responsible was someone they had trusted. For Ana's extended family, the impact was equally devastating. Grief was layered with frustration, anger, and unanswered questions. Without a fully recovered body, mourning became complicated. There was no final moment of closure, no traditional goodbye. Instead, there was a constant sense of incompleteness, a feeling that something essential had been stolen not only from Ana, but from everyone who loved her. Families often look for meaning after tragedy, some explanation that might soften the pain. In this case, meaning was hard to find. The crime was not the result of an obvious external threat. It came from within the home, from a place that was supposed to be safe. That reality made the loss feel even more cruel. Beyond the family, the case sparked widespread public discussion. Conversations about domestic violence resurfaced with urgency. Many people were forced to confront how abuse and control can exist behind closed doors, hidden beneath the appearance of normal family life. The case challenged assumptions about what danger looks like and where it comes from. It reminded the public that violence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it wears the mask of routine. Trust became a central theme in these discussions. How well do we really know the people we live with? How easily do we accept explanations that sound reasonable? How many warning signs go unnoticed because life appears stable on the surface? Ana's story became a cautionary tale about the cost of unquestioned trust and the complexity of domestic relationships that outsiders may never fully see. Perhaps the most haunting part of the aftermath is the reality that Ana never got to speak for herself. Her voice exists only through fragments, through memories shared by others, through evidence presented in court. She never had the chance to tell her version of events, never had the opportunity to explain what she was feeling, what she feared, or what she hoped for in the moments before her life ended. that silence is what lingers. The justice system spoke on her behalf, but justice cannot replace a voice. It cannot answer the questions that only she could have answered. Or her final thoughts. Did she know what was about to happen? Did she try to resist? Those answers remain forever out of reach. The aftermath of this case is not just about punishment. It is about absence, about children growing up with memories instead of a mother, about families learning to live with grief that has no clean edges, and about a public left grappling with the uncomfortable truth that some of the most devastating crimes happen quietly in places that look like home. Anna's story did not end with a verdict. It continued in the lives reshaped by her absence, and in the silence left where her voice should have been. When we look back at the story of Ana Walshe, what makes it so unsettling is not just the crime itself, but how quietly it unfolded. There was no public breakdown, no dramatic warning signs visible to the outside world, no moment that screamed danger. Instead, everything about Anna's life appeared normal, structured, predictable, safe. And that is exactly why this case lingers in the minds of so many people. Evil in this story did not arrive suddenly or loudly. It lived inside routine, inside shared meals, inside a home filled with familiar voices and ordinary days. It wore the disguise of stability and trust. It hid behind explanations that sounded reasonable and behavior that appeared calm. That is the most frightening lesson of all. Not that evil exists, but that it can exist without drawing attention to itself. Betrayal sits at the center of this case. This was not a crime committed by a stranger. It was not an act of random violence. It was an act carried out by someone who shared a life with Ana, someone who slept under the same roof, someone trusted with her safety, her time, and her future. That betrayal is what makes the story so deeply personal and so universally disturbing. It forces us to confront the vulnerability that comes with intimacy. Ana trusted. She built a life. She followed routines that millions of people follow every day. And yet, those routines did not protect her. They became the very environment in which she was silenced. The betrayal was not just physical. It was emotional. It was structural. It was the collapse of everything that should have kept her safe. This case also teaches us about the danger of assumptions. How quickly we accept explanations that fit what we want to believe. How easily we overlook gaps when a story sounds normal. Anna's disappearance did not raise immediate alarms because it was wrapped in responsibility and routine. But normal does not mean safe, and familiar does not mean harmless. Perhaps the most haunting part of this story is what we will never know. Anna's thoughts, her final moments, her voice. She never had the chance to tell her story. Instead, others had to piece it together from silence, from data, from absence. Justice was served, but it came without answers that could ever fully satisfy those left behind. True crime stories often promise resolution, but real life rarely offers it. What remains is reflection, a quiet understanding that some of the most dangerous situations are not the ones we fear, but the ones we trust. Ana Walshe's story is not just about a murder. It is about deception disguised as normality, about how control can exist without chaos, about how danger does not always come from the shadows. Sometimes it comes from the places we feel safest. Sometimes the most dangerous place isn't outside. It's home. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or question what lies beneath ordinary lives, then this is exactly why Real Crime Saga exists. To tell the stories that don't scream, but whisper. The ones that remind us to look closer, to listen longer, and to never underestimate the power of truth, even when it comes too late.